Redwood Lane presents a version of California that feels eerily static. The lawns are trimmed to a uniform height, the streets are devoid of litter, and the houses capture the sunset in windows that are all positioned at the exact same angle. For Ethan and Lily, this stillness was a relief. They were arriving from Sacramento after 5 years of sleeplessness and guilt following the accident that took Claire's life, carrying a grief that had made their old world feel uninhabitable. The transition was surprisingly simple. The house at the end of the cul-de-sac was beautiful and oddly affordable, despite the multi-million-dollar properties surrounding it. The realtor seemed eager to finish the paperwork, mentioning only in passing that families here tended to move on quickly. Hidden behind the vines at the community entrance, a faded wooden sign offered a specific instruction: if you see yourself inside another house, leave immediately. To a man who had lost everything, the warning felt like a prank. The neighborhood's flawlessness offered the kind of sanctuary that made it easy to ignore the things that didn't quite fit. The oddities began with the neighborhood's timing. At 8:30 p.m., every porch light on the street clicks off at once. At 7 a.m., every neighbor appears on their lawn simultaneously to collect the paper, moving with a synchronized grace that feels more like a rehearsal than a morning routine. The first personal anomaly appeared in a closet, a framed photo of a family that didn't live there. The mother in the portrait shared the same blonde hair, the same posture, and the same smile as Ethan's late wife, Claire. That night, the reflection became a reality. Looking through the bathroom window, Lily saw a woman in the house next door brushing her hair. She was wearing the exact pale blue pajamas Claire had been wearing the night of the accident. When Ethan confronted the neighbor, the door was opened by a stranger, an older, dark-haired woman who looked nothing like the figure in the window. But on a table in the foyer, he saw the same family photograph he had found in his own closet. The neighborhood wasn't just mirroring a generic suburban ideal. It was beginning to surface the specific private images Ethan had tried so hard to leave behind in Sacramento. At exactly 3:09 a.m., the darkness of the cul-de-sac is broken. Every light in every room of every house turns on at once, casting a bright, clinical glow across the empty streets. In the windows across the street, families stood motionless, staring out into the night. One figure stood in the house directly opposite Ethan's, a man with his own face, wearing his own clothes, staring directly back at him. A neighbor named Walter eventually broke the silence. He claimed Redwood Lane was a remnant of a Cold War project, a government-funded experiment in behavioral duplication that had continued to run itself long after the researchers had left. The diagram of the project suggests the houses monitor more than just movement. They look for the emotional voids left by grief or loss, and the system begins filling the gaps with a synthesized version of what was taken. For Lily, the system offered the one thing she wanted most. By placing a version of her mother in the yards of neighboring houses, the street created a loop that drew the child further away from Ethan and into the neighborhood's logic. The pressure shifted when the duplicate arrived at the front door. This second Ethan didn't attack. He simply argued that the real Ethan was standing in the way of Lily having a complete family again. The experiment relies on a slow, psychological surrender. It presents a world where the tragedy never happened, asking the residents to choose a perfect lie over a painful truth. Beneath the garage, Ethan found a hidden meatman's hatch. It led into a network of concrete tunnels that hummed with the sound of a massive electrical current, stretching out under the foundations of the entire street. The archives revealed how long this cycle had been turning. Thousands of photographs showed the same families repeated over decades, different people playing the same roles in a sequence of endless replacements. In the central chamber, a massive computer system regulated the neighborhood's power and processed the data being collected from the houses above. On one of the screens, Ethan found his own name. A digital file was open, showing his memories and his emotional data, with a status light blinking red next to the words, "Replacement in progress." The figures in the windows weren't ghosts. They were the output of an algorithm that had finally determined Ethan was no longer the best version of himself for the experiment's needs. As the machine surged, copies of Ethan and Claire emerged from the shadows of the underground chamber. They weren't just duplicates of who they were now, but versions from every stage of their lives, younger, happier, and untouched by the accident. They spoke with a synchronized, rhythmic delay, offering a life where the grief of the last 5 years simply didn't exist. But the timing was wrong. Their smiles were too wide, and their movements were too precise to be real. Ethan struck a flare and dropped it into the heart of the central machine, triggering an immediate surge in the neighborhood's power grid. Above ground, the neighborhood was hit with a sudden silence. The lights flickered and died, and the families froze exactly where they were, their internal power sources failing as the facility collapsed. Ethan and Lily escaped the tunnels and drove away from the darkened cul-de-sac, eventually settling in a new town on the other side of the country. But the traces of Redwood Lane remained. Ethan still finds identical photos tucked into motel drawers, and every few weeks, at exactly 3:09 a.m., the lights in their new home turn on by themselves. One morning, Ethan found a new drawing taped to Lily's wall. It showed 4 figures standing in front of a house, with a message scrawled at the top in red crayon: "We miss you, Dad." The system had already mapped their minds. The physical neighborhood was gone, but the copies now lived in their memories, waiting for the next moment of vulnerability to return.